The wind rolled low and slow across the desert, dragging heat and dust like a curtain drawn over the land. The horizon trembled under the weight of the sun, and from that wavering line came a lone rider, tall in the saddle, shoulders broad enough to cast a shadow twice his own. His name was Elias Crow, though nobody in Silver Gulch would know that yet. His coat was the color of smoke, his hat bent low, his horse moving with a tired rhythm that spoke of a long road and a man with nowhere left to go. The town of Silver Gulch wasn't much to look at. A few wooden buildings baking in the noon sun, a crooked sign swaying above a saloon, and a church with a broken bell that hadn't rung in years. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and silence. Every door half closed, every window half watching. A place afraid to breathe. Elias rode down the main street slow, boots creaking in the stirrups. The sound of his horse's hooves echoed too loud, as though the town itself were listening. Men leaned on posts, eyes following him. Women pulled their children inside. Even the dogs didn't bark. Silver Gulch had seen strangers before, but not one built like this man. A giant drifter with hands like stone and eyes that never lingered too long on anything. He stopped outside the saloon. The sign above it read Mercer's Rest, the irony of it lost on no one but the dead. He swung down, the ground shaking faintly under his boots, and tied his horse. The swinging doors creaked when he entered, and the room went still. A dozen men sat inside, most wearing pistols that had seen recent use. They stared at him through the haze of smoke and whiskey. Elias nodded once, slow and polite, and walked to the bar. The bartender, a nervous old man with a towel over his shoulder, didn't ask for his name, just poured a drink. "You just riding through?" the bartender asked, voice low, eyes not meeting his. Elias didn't answer right away. He lifted the glass, sipped once, then set it down soft as dust. "Depends," he said finally. His voice was deep, steady, the kind of voice that carried weight even when it whispered. From a corner table, someone laughed, sharp and mocking. "Depends," he says. "Fella your size don't ride through nowhere. He stops wherever he pleases." The laughter spread like a snake through dry grass. A tall man with a black vest and mean eyes stood. His hand hovered near his gun, just enough to make sure everyone saw it. "Ain't often we get a mountain walking into our saloon," he said, stepping closer. "Where you from, big man?" Elias turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Nowhere that matters." The room waited. The tall man smirked, disappointed. He wanted a fight, a reason to spill blood and make the day less dull. But Elias turned back to his drink. A few chuckles. The tension thinned, but didn't vanish. Men watched him from the corners of their eyes, whispering, "That giant don't talk much. Maybe he's running from something. Maybe he's the hangman's ghost." Elias finished his drink, left 2 coins on the counter, and walked out. Outside, the wind had shifted, carrying with it the sound of hooves. A small cloud of riders came thundering down the road from the south, their dust trailing behind like a storm. The townsfolk disappeared into doorways as they arrived. 11 men, all wearing black bandanas tied around one arm, the Blackhorn Riders. At their head rode Cain Mercer himself, a man carved from arrogance and cruelty. His coat was fine, his boots polished, but his eyes were dead glass. He reined his horse hard in front of the saloon, scanning the street like it belonged to him. "Afternoon, folks," Cain called, smiling wide. "Hope nobody's forgotten who keeps this town safe." Safe was not the word for it. Cain kept Silver Gulch breathing the same way a wolf kept sheep alive, only long enough to feed again. Elias stood across the street, hands resting easy by his sides. His gaze met Cain's, and for a brief second, the outlaw's grin faltered. There was something in that stare, quiet, cold, knowing. Cain turned away first. "Get the woman," he said to his men. From the edge of town, a young couple stood frozen beside a wagon loaded with hay. The man, a farmer, face burnt red by the sun, stepped forward, trembling. "We already paid, Mr. Mercer. You said—" Cain's revolver flashed before the sentence ended. The farmer crumpled to the dust. His wife screamed, splitting the stillness. Elias didn't move. He watched, eyes steady, jaw tight. The riders laughed, riding circles around the weeping woman before riding off toward the saloon. One of them spat near Elias as he passed. For a long moment, there was nothing but wind and the sound of the woman's sobs. Then Elias stepped forward. He knelt beside the dead man, removed his hat, and closed the man's eyes. The widow looked up, fear and confusion mixing in her tears. Why are you helping?" Elias didn't answer. He looked at the horizon, where the rider's dust still hung in the air. Then he picked up a shovel lying in the wagon. By sundown, he had dug a grave on the edge of town. The woman stood behind him, clutching a folded hat to her chest. Elias said a quiet word over the grave, something the wind carried away before anyone could hear. When he returned to the saloon, the riders were inside, drinking loud. Cain sat at the bar, boots on the counter, talking big to no one in particular. He noticed Elias enter and smiled. "Well, look what the wind dragged back," he said. "You burying all my handiwork, stranger?" Elias didn't answer. He walked to the bar, ordered another drink. Cain's grin widened. "Not much of a talker, huh? I like that. Men who talk too much usually die with their mouths open." Laughter again, harsh and hollow. Elias turned, eyes sweeping over the men. The way he looked at them, calm, slow, measuring, made the room quiet again. Cain leaned forward. "You got a name?" "Elias," he said. "Elias what?" "Just Elias." Cain nodded, smirking. "Strong name for a strong man. You ride alone." Elias finished his drink, set the glass down. "Always." Cain studied him for a long moment. Then he stood, walked closer. "You handle a gun?" Elias met his stare. "I handle what needs handling." A silence passed between them, sharp as a drawn blade. Then Cain laughed, clapped him on the shoulder. "I like you. Big, quiet, mean-looking. A man like you could ride with us. Make yourself useful. We could use a wall like you when bullets start flying." Elias didn't answer. Cain's smile thinned. "You'll think on it," he said, and turned back to his men. "This town eats the weak. You don't want to be on the wrong side of that line." Elias looked at him once more before leaving. The sunlight outside had turned copper, stretching long shadows across the dust. His horse waited by the trough, patient as stone. He looked toward the small grave beyond the town, the one fresh mound of dirt beneath the evening sky. His jaw tightened. The wind whispered through the empty street, carrying the echo of Cain's laughter from the saloon. Elias touched the worn grip of the revolver at his side, his eyes cold and steady. Then he mounted up, turned his horse toward the darkening desert, and rode slow, the setting sun catching the edge of his scarred face. That night, Cain Mercer poured another round inside the saloon, laughing loud, not knowing that the giant drifter he had just invited into his gang was not another hired gun, but a storm come riding on a horse made of silence and vengeance. The nights in the desert were colder when a man rode with killers. The firelight threw long shadows over the canyon walls, painting the men of the Blackhorn Riders in flickering red and gold. Laughter cut through the stillness, sharp and mean, echoing off the stone. Bottles passed from hand to hand. Stories of blood and theft rolled off tongues, like hymns to the devil himself. Elias Crow sat apart from them, the firelight barely touching his face. He was a mountain among wolves, silent, watchful, a man who never smiled and never joined the noise. Cain Mercer liked to say his gang ran the border like kings. They robbed stagecoaches, raided ranches, and left bodies in the dust as warnings to whoever still believed in law. Elias rode with them through canyons so deep the sun barely reached, across plains wide enough to swallow a man's soul. He did what was asked, guarded the spoils, carried the wounded, broke down doors when Cain needed fear to walk ahead of him. The men called him the ox, said he didn't bleed, didn't feel. In truth, he felt everything, the sting of gunfire, the smell of smoke, the memory of screams that would never fade. Each time they rode out, the dust rose behind them like a funeral shroud. The others would shout and hoot, firing into the air, wild and proud of their cruelty. Elias kept his eyes on the horizon, counting the miles, not the money. He never laughed when they killed, never celebrated when they burned a man's home to cinders. When Cain asked him once why, Elias only said, "Fire don't amuse me." Cain had grinned, not knowing how true that was. One afternoon, after a robbery gone bloody, the gang made camp near a dry riverbed. The men bragged about their kills. Cain cleaned his revolver, humming an old tune. Elias walked away, down the ridge where the horses were tied. One of the animals, a young roan, had taken a bullet graze to the flank. The creature trembled as Elias knelt beside it. He tore a strip from his shirt, cleaned the wound, and poured water over it slow. "Easy," he murmured, voice low enough to be mistaken for wind. "You didn't choose your riders either." When he returned to the fire, one of the men, Fletcher, spat. "You fixin' to start doctoring horses now, Crow? Ain't enough blood on your hands. You gotta save something?" Elias said nothing. He sat, the fire reflecting in his eyes, but no warmth reached them. Fletcher smirked, turned back to his drink. Cain watched from the edge of the firelight, his grin steady, but his eyes curious. He'd seen men like Elias before, men who kept secrets buried under silence. But none had carried theirs so cleanly. The gang rode again 2 nights later, ambushing a mail coach near Drywater Canyon. The air was black with dust, bullets cracking the night apart. When the smoke cleared, the driver lay dead, the strongbox split open, and a boy no older than 14 crawled from the wreckage. His eyes were wide, blood running down one side of his face. He looked up at Elias and whispered, "Please." Cain laughed behind him. "Don't leave him breathing, Crow. Witnesses get talking." Elias looked at the boy, then at Cain. His revolver stayed in its holster. "He's no witness," Elias said, voice quiet. "He's just a child." Cain's expression hardened. "Then he's a future witness. End it." The desert wind howled between them, carrying the smell of gunpowder and blood. The boy shook, waiting for the sound that never came. Elias fired one shot into the dirt beside him, the bullet close enough to burn but not kill. "Run," he said. The boy didn't hesitate. The gang roared with laughter as the kid vanished into the night, thinking Elias had scared him for sport. Only Cain didn't laugh. He studied Elias long after the fire died that night, his cigar glowing like an ember in the dark. Days bled into weeks. The gang grew rich, bold, reckless. Cain began to boast that not even the U.S. Marshal could touch them. He strutted through camp like a king, but sometimes his eyes drifted to Elias, the giant who spoke little, killed clean, and looked at him as if he saw something Cain himself had forgotten. Jeb, the youngest of the riders, started following Elias around. Barely 20, all nerves and restless talk, he admired the quiet man who never lost his temper. "You don't like him much, do ya?" he asked one night, while Elias sharpened his knife. "Who?" Elias murmured. "The others. Cain especially." Elias looked up, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "Cain likes the sound of his own name. Men like that end loud." Jeb laughed softly. "You talk like an old preacher." Elias didn't answer. He saw the boy's youth, the same age his own son would have been if life hadn't burned it away. He felt a strange pull of pity for the kid, so out of place among wolves. That night, as the camp slept, Elias dreamed again, the same memory, clear as daylight. His cabin on the ridge, his wife, Miriam, hanging laundry in the soft wind, his boy, running with a carved wooden horse he'd whittled himself. Then the thunder of hooves, the laughter, the shouting, Cain Mercer's voice, barking orders, flames swallowing the porch, Miriam screamed tearing through the smoke. Elias running, too late, held back by fire and gunfire, and the sound of his son's cry fading into the roar. He woke with a start, breath shaking, hand gripping the revolver beside him. The stars overhead blurred in his vision, and the desert whispered through the grass. He wiped his face, looked toward Cain's tent glowing faintly in the moonlight. The man slept easy, as if the dead never haunted him. Elias stared until dawn, hatred pulsing slow and steady beneath his ribs. When morning came, the gang moved out again, headed for an abandoned mining town north of Silver Gulch. Cain had word of a shipment of rifles passing through, meant for a cavalry post. They rode through canyons that looked carved by old gods, the red rock glowing in the morning sun. Elias rode near the rear, quiet as ever. Jeb rode beside him, humming a tune. At midday, they stopped by a cluster of ruins, half-collapsed shacks, a rusted sign still swinging on one hinge. As the others unloaded gear, Elias wandered toward a half-buried wall where the wind had uncovered something pale. He crouched, brushing away sand. It was paper, brittle with age, an old wanted poster, faded but still legible. The Blackhorn Riders. Reward, $200 each. Last seen near Rio Mesa. Below the sketch of Kane Mercer were smaller names, and one of them, scrawled in cracked ink, froze Elias in place. Miriam Crow murdered. Elias Crow, presumed dead. His breath hitched, quiet but heavy, like a man struck in the chest. He stared at the poster until his hands began to tremble. The ink blurred as his fingers tightened. He remembered everything. The day the marshals came too late. The night he buried what was left, the oath whispered into the ground. Kane called out from the ridge, breaking the silence. Crow, mount up. We got a long ride yet. Elias folded the poster carefully, slipped it inside his coat, and stood. When he turned, his eyes were different. No longer calm, no longer distant. The storm that had lived quiet inside him for years had begun to move. As he walked back toward the horses, the wind picked up, scattering dust and ash through the air. Jeb looked up at him, squinting. Everything all right, Eli? Elias mounted his horse without answering. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. Yeah, Jeb, everything's finally all right. The raid began beneath a white sky, flat and empty as bone. Heat shimmered across the horizon, turning the far mesas into ghosts. Kane Mercer led the charge through a small settlement that hadn't even earned a name on the map. His men whooped and fired, their horses' hooves pounding the hard ground like thunder. Elias rode in silence among them, dust in his throat, eyes narrowed against the glare. He'd seen too many raids to count, burned homes, screaming faces, lives crushed beneath hooves, and every time, something in him went quieter instead of louder. They burst through the main street, scattering townsfolk like frightened birds. Kane spotted a woman running from a doorway, a baby in her arms. He reined his horse hard and pointed. Crow, he shouted over the chaos. Prove you ain't gone soft. Take her down. Elias froze. The woman stumbled in the dust, eyes wide with terror. She couldn't have been more than 20, her hair falling loose around her face. The baby cried, a thin, desperate sound swallowed by gunfire. Kane's grin widened. Do it. The world seemed to shrink. Elias's hand hovered over his gun, fingers brushing the worn leather grip. Around him, the riders watched, faces gleaming with cruelty and expectation. Kane's voice was sharp and cold. What's wrong, big man? Lost your nerve? Elias drew, but not at her. He fired a single shot into the air, the sound cracking through the raid like a warning. The woman bolted, vanishing between the buildings. The gang roared with laughter, thinking he'd only scared her. But Kane's eyes didn't laugh. They burned, calculating. When the raid ended, the town was nothing but smoke and ruin. Kane said nothing to Elias as they rode out, but the silence between them was heavy. That night, as the wind picked up over the dunes, Kane's second-in-command, Fletcher, leaned toward him. He hesitated. Fletcher said, Man like that hesitates once. He'll do it again. Kane nodded slowly, tossing a twig into the fire. Maybe. Or maybe he's playing a long game. Either way, we'll find out. The storm rolled in that night. Wind screamed through the canyon, driving sand like needles against skin. The gang huddled near their tents, their fire flickering blue and small. Elias stood apart, his coat snapping in the gale. He'd always liked storms. Something about them reminded him that even the sky could be angry. Fletcher came through the sand, a shadow moving wrong in the dim light. He stopped behind Elias, voice rough with whiskey and suspicion. You ain't one of us, Crow. Elias didn't turn. You drink too much, Fletcher. The lieutenant stepped closer. Maybe so, but I ain't blind. You don't kill when you're told. You don't laugh when we do. You got a ghost sitting on your shoulder, and I aim to find out whose it is. Elias turned then, slow and calm. You sure you want to ask? Fletcher's gun cleared its holster halfway before Elias moved. The flash lit the sandstorm like lightning. One shot, clean, final. Fletcher fell without a sound, the wind already burying him. Elias stood over him a long time, face unreadable, then dragged the body into the dark and dug a grave with his hands. The sand filled the hole as fast as he dug, as though the earth itself wanted to forget. When he finished, he whispered, "You could have lived quiet," and let the wind carry it away. When dawn came, the storm was gone. The camp stirred slowly, no one asking about Fletcher. Men disappeared in this life all the time. But Cain's gaze followed Elias across the morning light, quiet and heavy. As they rode, the landscape opened wide, miles of barren land, brush whispering in the heat. Elias's thoughts drifted back to years long buried. He'd been a rancher once, before the dust of death found him. A small cabin near Rio Mesa, a creek running behind it. Miriam singing in the morning as she baked, his boy chasing the dog through the yard, the smell of pine and bread. He remembered Cain's voice from that day, the laughter, the fire, the helpless weight of his wife's body in his arms. Cain hadn't been Cain back then. He'd ridden under another name, Jonas Keene, a petty outlaw looking for easy money. The law hadn't caught him. The desert had hidden him too well. And now here he was, rich in blood and fear, wearing a new name like a crown. Elias's jaw tightened as the memory passed. He looked up to find Jeb riding alongside him, face bright and unaware. "Heard about Fletcher," Jeb said quietly. "Cain says he went off to scout." Elias nodded. "That's one word for it." Jeb smiled nervously. "You think Cain's getting suspicious?" "I think he always was," Elias said. "He just needed proof." That evening, Cain announced they'd be riding north to meet a contact. He asked Elias to scout the trail ahead with Jeb. "You trust me?" Elias asked, voice level. Cain grinned. "You've been riding with me long enough. Figure it's time I returned the favor." Elias knew the tone beneath the words, but he saddled up anyway. They rode into the canyons at dusk. The sky burned copper, then faded into gray. The air smelled of rain, though none had fallen yet. The canyon walls rose high on both sides, close enough to whisper. Elias led the way, the sound of hooves echoing like distant drums. "You ever wonder what you'll do after all this?" Jeb asked suddenly. Elias glanced over. "After what?" "After the gang. Cain won't live forever. Maybe we find something else. Maybe something better." Elias almost smiled. "You're too young to be thinking that far." They rounded a bend, and the echo changed. A split second too late, Elias heard it. The sound of metal sliding, boots shifting on rock. Gunfire erupted from the cliffs. "Ambush!" Jeb shouted, ducking as bullets sparked off a stone. Elias threw himself from the saddle, dragging the boy down. His revolver barked twice, 3 times, sending shadows tumbling from above. But there were too many. One bullet found his side, hot and deep. He gritted his teeth, firing back until the canyon fell silent again. When the smoke cleared, Jeb knelt beside him, shaking. "Eli." "Oh God," they said. "Cain said it was just a scout. He didn't." Elias grabbed his shirt front, pulling him close. "He sent you to lead me here." "I didn't know. I swear it." The boy's eyes were wild with guilt. "He said it was just for supplies. Said you'd meet him up ahead." Elias looked at him for a long time, then let go. The pain in his side pulsed with his heartbeat, but his voice stayed calm. "It ain't your fault, son." He pushed himself up, blood seeping through his coat. Around them, the canyon floor was littered with bodies, Cain's handiwork written in every bullet. Jeb reached to help, but Elias waved him off. "Go back to camp," he said. "Say nothing to Eli. Do it. If you stay, Cain'll kill you next." The boy hesitated, then nodded, tears cutting tracks through the dust. He mounted and rode off, his figure shrinking between the cliffs until it was gone. Elias sank against the rock, breathing slow. The wound burned, but he pressed his palm against it, steadying the rhythm. The sky above was breaking open, the storm returning, black clouds rolling in, wind rising through the canyon like a ghost. He looked up into that darkness, rain beginning to fall in slow, heavy drops. His voice was barely more than a whisper, carried away by the storm. "Tomorrow, Cain Mercer dies." Dawn came bleeding over Dead Horse Canyon, slow and red as if the sun itself knew what was coming. The gang slept in their scattered tents, rifles laid against saddles, horses still tethered in the mist. Smoke from the dying fire curled weakly into the pale sky. No one saw the shadow move among the rocks above them, a tall, broad figure, coat torn, face carved from silence and storm. Elias Crow had come back from the dead. He moved with the patience of a hunter. Every sound of his boots was swallowed by sand. He checked the cylinder of his revolver, each round gleaming dull in the half-light. 6 bullets. 6 ghosts waiting for release. Below, Kane Mercer's laughter drifted up from his tent, the easy confidence of a man who'd forgotten fear. Elias watched him for a long moment, then turned toward the sentry perched on the ridge. The man yawned, rubbing his eyes, bored with life and watch duty. He never saw the giant rise behind him. A hand clamped over his mouth, steel whispered once, and the guard sagged soundlessly into the dust. The others went just as quietly. A knife through the ribs. A single, silent shot. One by one, the Blackhorn riders fell to the desert that had once hidden them. Elias worked without anger now, only precision. Rage had burned itself to ash long ago. All that remained was duty. By the time the first man stirred and realized something was wrong, the camp was already a graveyard. Gunfire split the morning, wild and panicked. Horses screamed, scattering into the canyon. Elias stepped through the smoke, his revolver steady, his shadow long against the rising light. Jeb stumbled from a tent, barefoot and terrified. "Eli, God Almighty, what are you doing?" Elias turned toward him. His face was streaked with dust and blood, but his eyes were clear. "Finishing it." "You killed them," Jeb stammered. "All of them." "Not all." Elias looked past him, toward the large tent at the center of Camp Kane's. "One left." Kane emerged then, revolver in hand, shirt half-buttoned, fury twisting his face. "You treacherous son of a bitch," he shouted. "You think you can ride with me and live to tell it?" Elias didn't answer. He reloaded, slow and deliberate, the sound of each cartridge clicking into the chamber echoing in the stillness. Kane's men, what few remained, backed away. They knew what they were watching wasn't a fight. It was judgment. Kane fired first, 3 shots in quick succession. Dust leapt from the rocks near Elias's boots. The 4th shot was his. Kane's hat went spinning into the fire. Another shot dropped one of the panicked riders. Then another. The canyon rang with death, the echoes chasing themselves through the stone walls. When the smoke cleared, only 3 were left standing, Kane, Jeb, and Elias. Jeb raised shaking hands. "Please, Eli, don't. I didn't know what he planned. I swear I didn't." Elias's gun didn't waver. His voice was low, rough as gravel. "I know, son." He holstered the weapon. "You're not your father's sin." Jeb's breath broke. Relief and shame tangled together. He turned and ran into the desert, disappearing into the light. Kane watched him go, laughing bitterly. "Mercy? From you?" He stepped closer, eyes gleaming. "You think revenge makes you righteous? You think killing me brings her back?" Elias looked at him, calm as stone. "No," he said, "but it'll quiet the wind for a while." Kane's smile faltered. For the first time, something like fear touched his face. They stood at the cliff's edge, the canyon yawning below, the sun a molten coin behind them. 2 men carved from the same dust, bound by death and memory. Kane drew fast. He always was fast. But Elias didn't miss. The shot echoed across the cliffs, rolling through the canyon like thunder. Kane staggered back, disbelief frozen on his face, then toppled over the edge. The sound of his body, striking the rocks below, was swallowed by the wind. Silence followed, vast and endless. Elias stood a long time, the revolver heavy in his hand, smoke curling from the barrel. When the sun climbed higher, he holstered it for the last time. He found a flat patch of ground near the cliff and dug with his hands until the earth gave way. From his coat, he pulled a small silver locket, tarnished, dented, still warm from his body heat. Inside, a faded photograph of a woman and child smiled up through the dust. He laid his gun beside it, the metal dark against the sand. "I kept my word," he whispered. The wind shifted, cool and clean. brushing against his face like a touch. For the first time in years, he closed his eyes, without seeing fire. By noon, the camp was nothing but wind-blown ashes. When travelers passed through Dead Horse Canyon weeks later, they found the remains, burned tents, spent shells, bones half buried in the sand. And near the cliff, two things side by side, an old revolver and a silver locket, their shadows forever intertwined. Stories spread like wildfire across the frontier. They said a giant rode with a gang of killers only to erase them from the earth. Some called him a ghost. Some said he was justice made flesh. The legend grew, whispered in saloons, retold by campfire light, reshaped by every tongue that feared and admired him. They called him the Giant Drifter. And when the desert wind swept through Silver Gulch at night, rattling old shutters and stirring the dust from forgotten graves, folks swore they could still hear the echo of his horse moving slow through the canyon, a rhythm steady as a heartbeat, fading into eternity. Some men ride for gold, some for glory, but he rode for ghosts,